I am at Fort Pickens, which is one of the attractions at the Gulf Islands National Park Service. So there is a lot of history here, and so I want to show you guys this place. It's pretty amazing.
In 1825, legislation was passed to establish a Navy yard and depot on the Pensacola Bay. Fortifications were needed to protect the new territory. These arched rooms are called casemates. Casemates protected soldiers and cannon. They also supported the upper level or barbette of Fort Pickens. Each casemate in the fort had one or two windows or embrasures. Soldiers fired cannon through these embrasures. This cannon is a 32-pounder. It sits on top of an oak carriage. The carriage is connected to the brick wall. Under the embrasure you will discover an opening. A metal plate called a tongue connects the carriage to a metal pin in the wall. This system locked the cannon to the wall and helped soldiers point their weapon. At the bottom below the cannon you will find granite blocks or traverse stones. With iron rails bolted on top, traverse stones made rolling cannon from side to side easier. Today you can still see the remains of traverse stones and rails around the fort. Cannon like this 32-pounder made a lot of smoke. This doorway leads into the first mine casemate at Fort Pickens. Completed in 1894, this room became one of several onshore buildings used by soldiers to operate an underwater minefield. Long ago, the Army considered underwater mines one of the main weapons needed to defend a harbor. When engineers began updating Pensacola Bay's defenses in the late 1800s, they made sure to include mines in their plans. A mine casemate was the heart of a controlled mine system. This area held batteries that powered the mines. It also housed the controls for setting off the mines. From the mine casemate, electrical cables ran underground, entered the bay, and extended to the minefield. When an officer gave the command, a soldier at the operating panel flipped a switch and detonated a mine. Because of high humidity, engineers built a new mine casemate outside the fort in 1907. This brick building still stands today. The Army eliminated Pensacola Bay's mine defense system in 1926. Soldiers had many options to defend Fort Pickens. This is one of those options. It is called a countermine. Fort Pickens has two countermines. The countermines are on the fort's landward side and next to powder magazines. Both have three narrow chambers that extend into the wall. During a battle, soldiers on the fort could move kegs of gunpowder from a powder magazine to a chamber. Each chamber could hold 1,027 pounds of gunpowder. When an attacker charged the fort, the defenders would ignite the gunpowder and explode a chamber. The explosion would wreck the fort but stop an attack. To fire a cannon, soldiers needed gunpowder. Fort Pickens originally had 3 powder magazines. The magazines were lined with wood to help keep gunpowder dry. Anyone who entered a magazine had to remove their shoes or put socks over them to prevent sparks. This is because the soles of shoes were sometimes attached with nails. Fort Pickens' 3 magazines could hold more than 272,000 pounds of powder. This large quantity allowed soldiers to defend the fort during a long siege. This covered walkway is a gallery. A gallery protected soldiers and supplies while moving around a fort in a battle. The Army added concrete stalls to the gallery in the late 1800s. The original use remains unclear. Soldiers may have used these stalls as shelf supports to store equipment. They could have kept equipment here for the underwater minefield, or they could have used the supports for a fort inside Fort Pickens named Battery Pensacola. In 1903, engineers turned these rooms into a central power station. Here they installed one 50-kilowatt Skinner-Willey generator. It also had one 8 and one 10-kilowatt General Electric generators. The station housed 3 engines, a switchboard, and 3 storage batteries. To power the generators, engineers built a boiler house outside the power station. This building housed a 103 horsepower Babcock and Wilcox boiler, a feed pump, and heater. Coal was stored in a casemate near the Sally Port, but the 1920s, the Army no longer needed the central power station. The equipment was sold and the boiler house demolished. This outer wall is called a counter-scarp. The counter-scarp supports a man-made hill called a glacis. Like a shield, the counter-scarp protected Fort Pickens' main wall, called the Scarp. In the 1800s, the counter-scarp and scarp measured about 40 feet tall. Wrapping around Fort Pickens, a dry ditch separated these towering walls. Attackers who reached the dry ditch would be caught in a deadly crossfire. By the summer of 1915, Army engineers filled the dry ditch to better protect the area from hurricanes. They also spread compost and planted grass to hold and fix the sand and to reduce the glare from the sun. We are now entering a bastion through a side door called a postern. A bastion is a projection from the main wall of a fort. It allowed defenders to fire along a fort's wall. Soldiers called this bastion Bastion A. Bastion A has casemates and embrasures for cannon. It also has a countermine with 3 tunnels and a powder magazine. The interior of this bastion looks much as it did in the 1800s. The Army built Battery Pensacola between 1898 and 1899. Shortly after construction began, it decided to add a tunnel to the project. This tunnel extended from the south side of the battery to the north side. This tunnel allowed soldiers to use the casemates that once existed inside the fort's south wall. In the early 1920s, a work crew built a new power station to provide electricity to the battery. They placed the power station in a location that closed the north entrance to the tunnel. These are the remains of Bastion B's 2 cisterns. These cisterns stored rainwater that fell on Fort Pickens. Soldiers used this water to drink, cook, and wash their uniforms. 2 more cisterns were once located in the fort's northwest bastion, Bastion D. Together, these 4 cisterns stored almost 200,000 gallons of water. With this supply, 1,200 soldiers could survive in the fort for up to 161 days. The Bastion B cisterns sustained damage between 1915 and 1916. The Bastion D cisterns were destroyed in an accidental explosion in 1899. There is a whole substructure supporting Fort Pickens. Hidden underfoot is a web of wooden beams and reverse brick arches. Enslaved black laborers broke ground on Fort Pickens in 1829. They began by digging into the island. They then installed a heavy framework of wooden beams called grillage. Using lumber from local Pensacola mills, the laborers installed grillage to create a foundation. Engineers used arches to support the weight of the fort on this grillage foundation. Overhead arches spread the weight to the piers. The reverse arches distributed the weight across the grillage structure to limit settling. This is Tower Bastion. From the Barbette above, soldiers fired cannon over the fort's wall. Inside the casemates below, defenders fired cannon along the fort's wall. From the Barbette, you can see the Gulf of Mexico, Pensacola Pass, and Pensacola Bay. Here, a 15-inch Rodman gun capable of firing a 450-pound solid shot up to 5 miles away stands guard over the Emerald Coast. Looking south toward the Gulf of Mexico, you can see damaged walls with exposed arches. Engineers demolished these walls between 1915 and 1916. Upon completion, soldiers at Battery Pensacola had better views of targets. Today, the exposed arches help us understand how the fort was built. Engineers designed and built an elaborate defense system on Pensacola Bay between 1895 and 1943. Completed in 1899, Battery Pensacola once played a major role in this system. 4 amazing technologies made Battery Pensacola revolutionary. A newer construction material, reinforced concrete, made the structure stronger than Fort Pickens. The concrete was painted black to reduce glare from the intense Florida sun. Newly invented electrical distribution provided the electricity to make loading and firing the battery's guns easier. The newly invented telephone allowed soldiers to communicate information more quickly and over greater distances. Steel guns capable of withstanding the extreme forces allowed soldiers to hit targets with deadly precision. Like Fort Pickens, Battery Pensacola became obsolete. The Army stopped using the battery in 1933 and removed its guns in 1934. But this fort within a fort had two 12-inch rifles on carriages that could disappear behind the walls after firing 1,070-pound shells at ships 8 miles away. The Army built several other batteries on this end of Santa Rosa Island in the late 1800s and early 1900s.
Where's her outfit?
No.
Fort Pickens' brick walls and cast iron guns had become obsolete by the end of the Civil War. Harbor defenses now called for steel guns in low-lying concrete batteries. Truman's 3-inch rapid-fire guns mounted in 1905 guarded the inner channel and minefield against fast torpedo boats and minesweepers, the latest threats of the day. Truman's guns and equipment were moved to Battery Cullom in 1943. In 1922, Private Hugo W. Papp looked on as the gun crew practiced firing one of Battery Payne's rapid-fire rifles. The recoil tore the gun from its mount and hurled it down the steps at Papp. In an instant he was dead. This was the only time that a life was taken by any of the guns at Fort Pickens batteries, which never saw combat. The two 3-inch rifles here, like those at Battery Truman, had a 360-degree sweep of fire, making them excellent protectors of the inner harbor and the Navy Yard. All alone in the glaring sun, scanning the horizon, looking for but hoping not to see an enemy ship or plane. Guard duty was no picnic for the Coast Artillery Corps during World War II. Soldiers stood guard round the clock in 3 or 4 hour shifts. At night you'd hear something moving, one soldier said, and you couldn't tell if it was a German off of a U-boat or not. The battery, built in 1898 for two 4.72-inch Armstrong rifles, was converted into a range-finding station for Battery Payne in 1922 and used throughout World War II. Gun crews performed a carefully choreographed ballet every time they loaded and fired an artillery piece. One slip-up in the teamwork could cause serious injuries or death. Crews practiced aiming at a target, opening the breech, loading and ramming the projectile into the barrel, inserting the primer charge, and firing, all in 30 seconds. After drilling again and again, the soldiers were given a little time to relax, occasionally even to go crabbing or fishing along the beach. Hidden beneath this vegetated mound of Battery 234 were soldiers who figured out solutions to a pressing problem. Where should artillery crews aim the guns to strike an attacking ship? It took some fast teamwork. Soldiers in the nearby end towers would take simultaneous compass readings of an approaching enemy ship and telephone the information to the plotting room. There, soldiers used the data to plot a triangle on a table, calculate the distance to the target, and relay their calculation to the gun crews for precision firing. Battery Cooper's rifles popped up, disappeared, and reappeared like a jack-in-the-box. The battery, built in 1906, had two 6-inch rifles mounted on disappearing carriages. When the guns were fired, the recoil automatically lowered them behind the concrete wall, which protected the crews while they reloaded the guns. Counterweights returned them to the firing position. During World War I, the U.S. Army removed the guns for possible use as railway guns in France. The gun you see here today came from the Smithsonian Institution. Battery Worth's huge guns were deafening. The gun crews were told to stay loose and keep your mouth open. Cotton was available, but most soldiers did not use it and developed artilleryman's ear. Gun pits on the left and right housed 8 12-inch mortars that could lob 700-pound projectiles in high arcs. to penetrate ship decks 7 to 9 miles away. Half the armament was scrapped after World War I, but 4 mortars remained until 1942, when the battery became the Army-Navy Harbor Defense Command Post for the Pensacola area during World War II.
Walking through these grounds, this place has really humbled me, and it's made me realize that my life is not so bad. These dungeons are so incredible, what people have had to go through. And of course, fighting in a war is just terrible. But I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed my time here.